Hello my friends, my name is Betsy, and today I'm going to be showing you 3 beginner-friendly exercises to help you confidently fill that blank page. The reality is that even for those of us who draw pretty regularly, it can often be difficult to figure out what it is that we want to put on the paper, and it is especially during those times when it's important to simply start putting lines on the paper. And only after we actually start drawing, then the inspiration will come. Which is why it's often the case that after you started doodling, then you start getting many more ideas for something totally different or totally innovative that you want to create. So before we get started, I'd like to talk about the size of your canvas or the size of your paper. If you're working in a regular size sketchbook or in just a regular piece of paper, you might find it that the large size of the paper is going to be a little intimidating. So in order to make these exercises a little bit easier for you, I would like to encourage you to either cut up the paper or make some divisions on it using your pencil so that you have some smaller areas to work with. So what I did here is I just cut up the paper, I tore it up so that I have smaller pieces of paper to work with. Now, along with this paper, you're also going to need just a regular pen, whichever your favorite is, and you might even need a pencil for later. So let's go ahead and get started with the first of these exercises. And all I'm really going to do is I'm going to take my pen and I'm going to start creating some simple circles or ovals. And I'm just going to start placing them next to each other. In this case, I'm deciding not to let them touch. I want to explore what it looks like when there's spaces in between them. And so you can see that I'm creating a few ovals of different sizes, and they could be perfect circles or they can look like pebbles or stones on the floor. So if you've ever seen a cobbled road, this is what I'm drawing here. And I'm just leaving some spaces in between. And then what I'm going to do with these shapes, so right now they are just 2-dimensional shapes. What I'm going to try to do is turn them into 3-dimensional forms. So I'm going to start adding these lines, and they are going to be curved so that it begins to look like these shapes have dimensionality, like they're 3-dimensional. And I'm just going to start filling in the rest of these with these curved lines. And you can go ahead and try doing a couple of different types of lines. So here I'm drawing some that are S-shaped, and I kind of started in the middle and just started working my way outward from there. And you can just experiment with different lines, putting the lines closer together or farther apart. I generally tend to make the lines get closer together as they reach the outer edges of the form. So that way it does create a better illusion of shape or of that dimensionality that I'm trying to give them. I've noticed that other artists will usually share some exercises similar to these just as a warm-up. And I do think that they are an excellent warm-up, even if you're trying to draw something akin to realism. But in this case, we're using the exercise purely to get us inspired, because remember, it's one of those bad days. We just don't know what to draw. We can't figure it out. And maybe drawing some forms is going to help us figure out what it is that we want to draw later. Although truthfully, in my own personal experience, these forms themselves are the art for me. So you can see I'm starting this strangely shaped one here, and it looks maybe a little bit more like a seashell. And so the hope here is that as you're creating these lines onto these shapes, you'll start seeing things that were not there before. You'll start to recognize shapes. Something might look like a rock. Something might look like a precious stone. It might look like a drop of water, or it might look like a seashell. And as you're creating these lines, you're going to see things that are going to give you ideas. One might look like a marble, and you might think, that gives me a great idea. The next time that I started drawing, I'm going to draw more marbles, and they're going to look so excellent with 20 marbles on the page surrounded by a couple of flowers, and then you can just go from there. And so right now, we're just creating these 3-dimensional forms just to see where it goes. We're just experimenting. And so I'm just trying to add lines starting from different sides. Sometimes I start from the center, sometimes I start from the outer edge, and just see where it takes me. And as you can see, this is a pretty quick exercise. It doesn't take too long. If you feel like it and you really like the result here, you can just keep adding more shapes around it and see where it takes you. And so this right here is the last of them, and I think it looks pretty good. This was an interesting little exercise. So as we move on, the second exercise that I'd like to show you is also going to allow you to create three-dimensional forms. In this case, though, I'm going to get started in the corner of the page, and I'm going to create this teardrop shape. And then I'm going to put another one next to it so the pointed ends are very close to each other. And as you can see, I'm allowing it to grow organically, heading outwards. And you can go ahead and experiment with the angles that you like. Some of them can be a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. Some of them can be thin, some of them can be thick. And as you experiment with the sizes of these teardrops, you'll start to find certain forms that really appeal to you. You might think that it looks like a leaf, or it could look like a petal. And so what I'm going to do here, what I'm doing is adding a lot of lines starting from the point of each of these shapes, just to create that dark area right there on the tip of each shape. And again, what this is doing is it's giving it some dimensionality. And as I keep adding these in, you can see it starts to look just a little bit darker on the tips of the shapes. So right now I'm working with the black pen, but truthfully, I think this would look really lovely if I picked up a purple pen, and I'm thinking maybe even a pink pen. So see, I'm already getting ideas for something different I might want to do. Because in this case, I'm thinking a lot of petals, like flower petals. They might also look like water droplets if I were to use some blue color pencils. I could color it in later and it could look like water. But for now, we're just exploring. We're trying to see where these shapes will take us. Okay, so this is where our droplets look like. It looks like water is splashing. All right, so if we move on to our third exercise, we're again going to be creating three-dimensional forms, but in a different way. So for this one, I'm deciding to draw these two curved lines from corner to corner. It looks almost like a leaf, like a very long, slender leaf. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a couple more of these slits to the sides, and they can be anywhere. You can put them anywhere you want. I'm just choosing to lay them next to each other like that because I tend not to lay them that way. It almost makes it look like a kind of a blossom or a plant that's opening up. And so here's one, and here's two, and here is the third one. I'm just exploring, just trying to see what it looks like when they're next to each other. And what I'm going to do is inside of each one of these forms, I'm going to give it some dimensionality by adding these little loops. And sometimes I can just go forward, or sometimes I can just keep holding the pen and go forwards and backwards, forwards and backwards. And as I add these little curved lines, it's going to give the impression that it's a three-dimensional object. And again, this is just a little practice. I'm just trying to see where this takes me. Forward and backwards and forward and backwards. It's very interesting the way it looks when there are these gaps in between them. The shapes seem to be isolated. There's space. So that afterwards I might want to take a colored pencil and maybe see what it looks like when there's some color behind them. In this case, I'm thinking of some green. Some green might be interesting. And I might want to take I'm thinking of getting a charcoal pencil, maybe adding some highlights just to really help with the three-dimensional look of these shapes. Personally, when I draw this kind of form, it can be a little challenging because it requires me to pay a little bit more attention than usual. Because if I'm not careful, these lines would end up all over the place. And so I'm trying to be really careful and really methodical. Usually when I create inside of a form like this one that's a little bit wider, it takes me a second to really feel where I'm putting the lines. And as you can see, I only like to move my pen forward. It helps me have more control over the lines when I work that way. But it really is just so satisfying just seeing how it was totally flat before, and now it's starting to look like it's jumping out of the page, and that's really nice. And as you're doing this, you might start getting some ideas for some other things you want to draw. And that's the whole point of these exercises, is to inspire your creativity, to help your own personal artistic muse come back to you so that you can get more ideas and get more things created on the paper. So here I am going forwards, backwards, forwards, backwards. I find that this practice in particular is very meditative. I'm really focused, really trying to get those lines where I want them, and appreciating the ink on the paper and just watching these forms come to life. And in particular, the end result of this drawing, I don't think that it's terribly beautiful. I don't find it to be hugely impressive, but I'm happy with the way it came out. It still looks good. It was still an achievement. And so here are the 3 drawings that we created. But I also created a second version of these. And in this second version, I decided to rearrange the forms in just a slightly different way. And I would like to show these to you because this will allow you to see how if you just make a slightly different choice, it can give you an entirely different drawing. So here, the petals were instead placed radially, and they fan out like as if it were a flower. And then for this one, I decided to allow those leaf shapes to instead touch, and then it gives a completely different look. It's a completely different drawing. So again, just doing those exercises helped give me a few ideas, and then I decided to try something completely different and see where it went. Now, of course, the very final part of this exercise is going to be to have you go and grab a pencil and start doing some shading. If you start doing some shading, and all you have to do is go around the edges with your pencil and then maybe blend it in a little bit with your finger or with a blending stump, it's really going to give you some more ideas. You're going to start thinking of what those forms look like, because this is an art form that's very abstract. We're taking doodles and we're making them look like they're jumping out of the page. It's really going to start giving you so many ideas. You're going to think of flowers, you're going to think of fireworks, you're going to start thinking of lots of different life forms, coral in the ocean, and then you can get going from there. You can start replicating these forms in all sorts of different directions, rearrange them in different combinations. Now even I'm thinking that I want to take all 3 of those forms and make one full-size drawing with all 3 of them together. And so here they are, the end result. They are fully shaded. Pretty interesting little forms. It was a nice exercise just to get the creative juices flowing. And so I'm hoping that you were able to try this, or that you take a few moments to give some of these a try. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you in the next one.